The Battle of Westphalia Europe was burning. For more than 3 decades, the 30 Years' War had consumed the continent. Villages disappeared from maps. Cities became ruins. Entire populations were displaced, starving, and traumatized. What had begun as a religious conflict between Protestant and Catholic states slowly transformed into a brutal struggle for political dominance, dynastic ambition, and survival. By the time the war reached its most destructive phase, Europe was exhausted. At the center of this devastation stood the region of Westphalia. Westphalia was not merely a battlefield. It was a crossroads, a land of trade routes, rivers, and strategic passes that connected the heart of Europe. Control over Westphalia meant control over movement, supply lines, and influence. For rival powers, losing Westphalia was unthinkable. And so, inevitably, war came to its fields. Armies began to move. From distant territories, columns of soldiers marched through forests and broken roads. Infantrymen carried heavy pikes and muskets. Cavalry rode alongside them, armored and armed with swords and pistols. Artillery units dragged massive cannons through mud and rain, often losing men before the battle even began. These soldiers were not professionals in the modern sense. Many were peasants, mercenaries, or conscripts. Some fought for faith, believing God guided their cause. Others fought for pale loyalty to a ruler, or simply because refusal meant death. Disease, hunger, and fear followed them everywhere. As the armies approached Westphalia, the land itself bore the scars of war. Burned farms, abandoned villages, and silent churches lined their path. Civilians fled when they could. Those who remained often paid with their lives. When the opposing forces finally reached the plains of Westphalia, tension filled the air. Both sides understood what was at stake. As night fell before the battle, thousands of campfires flickered across the dark landscape. Soldiers sat in silence, sharpening blades, repairing armor, or whispering prayers. Some wrote final letters they would never send. Others stared into the flames, knowing dawn might be their last. Sleep came only to a few. When morning arrived, a thick fog settled over the battlefield. The land seemed frozen in time. Men formed ranks in silence. Officers walked among them, offering final commands and promises of glory. Drums began to beat slowly, echoing across the field like a heartbeat. Flags were raised, their colors barely visible through the mist. For a brief moment, the world stood still. Then the first cannon fired. The explosion shattered the fog and ripped through the quiet morning. Smoke and fire erupted, followed by the deafening roar of artillery. The ground trembled beneath the soldiers' feet. Almost instantly, return fire answered from across the field. The battle had begun. Infantry units advanced in tight formations. Pikemen lowered their long weapons, creating walls of steel. Musketeers fired volleys, the sound rolling across the field like thunder. Visibility dropped as smoke thickened, turning the battlefield into a nightmare of shadows and noise. Men fell by the dozens. Some were struck by bullets. Others were crushed underfoot. Wounded soldiers screamed for help that would never come. Commanders shouted orders that vanished into the chaos. Still, the lines pressed forward. Pikes collided with brutal force. Close combat followed, desperate, violent, and unforgiving. There was no room for mercy. Survival depended on strength, speed, and sheer luck. Then came the cavalry. From behind the smoke, armored horsemen charged forward at full speed. The sound of hooves thundered across the ground. Swords flashed as riders crashed into enemy formations, tearing through infantry lines with terrifying momentum. The impact was devastating. Men were thrown aside, horses screamed, the ground turned slick with blood and mud. For a moment, it seemed the cavalry charge might decide the battle entirely, but the fighting did not stop. Artillery continued to fire relentlessly. Cannons tore massive gaps through ranks of soldiers. Explosions sent bodies flying through the air. The battlefield became a place where orientation was lost, where friend and enemy looked the same beneath smoke and grime. Hours passed, though time had no meaning anymore. The sun climbed higher, burning through the fog, revealing the true scale of destruction. Thousands lay dead or dying. Still, neither side was willing to retreat. What followed was total chaos. Stat units became scattered, flags were torn apart, officers were killed or wounded, soldiers fought in small groups or alone, driven by instinct rather than command. Some fled, others charged forward in blind desperation. At this point, the battle was no longer about strategy, it was about endurance. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance began to shift. One side showed signs of exhaustion first. Supply lines had failed, ammunition ran low, morale collapsed as soldiers realized reinforcements would not arrive. A single breach appeared in the line, then another. Suddenly, the formation broke. What had been an organized army turned into a retreating mass of men. Some dropped their weapons, others were cut down as they fled. The opposing force surged forward, pressing the advantage without mercy. The outcome was sealed. As the sun began to descend, the fighting finally slowed. Cannons fell silent. Muskets stopped firing. The battlefield, once deafening, became eerily quiet. Only the cries of the wounded remained. Smoke drifted lazily across the land, revealing the aftermath. Bodies covered the field as far as the eye could see. Broken weapons, shattered armor, and torn banners lay scattered like relics of a forgotten world. Survivors wandered among the dead, searching for familiar faces. Some collapsed from exhaustion, others knelt in silence, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. There was no celebration. Victory felt hollow. The Battle of Westphalia had been won, but at a cost that could never be repaid. The land was ruined, the people were broken, and the war, though altered, was not yet over. Yet Westphalia marked a turning point in the years that followed. The conflict slowly moved toward its conclusion. Diplomats, exhausted by decades of bloodshed, gathered to negotiate peace. The result would be the Treaties of Westphalia, agreements that ended the 30 Years' War and reshaped Europe forever. Borders were redrawn, states gained sovereignty, the foundations of the modern international system were laid, and all of it was built upon the suffering of those who fought and died on fields like Westphalia. Today, the battle is remembered not just as a military engagement, but as a symbol of an era when war consumed everything it touched. Westphalia reminds us that history is written not only by kings and treaties, but by ordinary people forced into extraordinary violence. Their voices may be silent now, but their echoes remain. If you'd like to discover more stories like this one, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this journey through these amazing tales.